Hello. I may have made a similar video to this before, but nevertheless, I'd like to do it again. The last two videos I've made have been rather contentious, if I'm being honest, and they have been about the subject of, excuse me whilst I'm just trying to find a good position for there, that's good. Yes, they've been on the contentious subject of China, Communist Party, nationalism, and so on and so on. I want to balance that out a little bit because A, I just want to, and B, I don't want people to get the wrong impression about me and think that I'm anti-China. I'm really, really not. Some of the most important people in my life have been Chinese, and it's a country I feel very attached to, actually. In fact, I've just been looking at something. This was given to me by a friend. Got many presents from my Chinese friends, but this little book, Life in East China, I actually got it when I was in South China, but it's one of my favorite books. It's just a little collection of photographs from the 50s to the 80s, actually from the 50s to the 2000s. Um, yeah, just been looking at that. Give you another little bit of a tour of my room. If you look over here, you see I've got three flags. That's the British flag, the American flag. The reason being, well, A, I've got those flags through being given them as presents. So, but those are actually the three countries that have had the biggest influence on my life, and China's one of them. So, anyway, without further ado, I want to discuss a little bit about the things that I like about China. Because, especially online, people can be easily misunderstood, and I don't want to be. Um, so, I do want to discuss some of the things I like, and there's many things I like. Um, this is partly to balance the other videos, and it's not that I stand by everything I said in those videos. It's not about that, but just to show that I am objective and I do I'm not anti-China at all. In many ways, I describe myself as a Sinophile. Anyway, um, okay, here's one thing. Food. I know that might sound like a sort of cliched answer, but I do think there's a great deal of diversity in Chinese food, and a lot of it's not only is it affordable within China, you can get an evening meal for the equivalent of £1. Um, and a decent evening meal, I'm not talking like really, really high quality, but the point is it's fresh. And a lot of the ingredients are very natural and very, for me anyway, fulfilling. Different parts of the country have different cuisines. The south tends to focus a bit more on rice dishes, the north a bit more on noodle dishes, but you get all sorts of variations, and a lot of it is very filling and very affordable. And I think very healthy because it is directly sourced. I know there's been some controversies about Chinese food products, but in my time there, I found it was very tasty, very healthy, um, and yeah, I enjoyed that. So certainly Chinese food. Um, Maybe not so much chicken meat on the bone. I find that a bit difficult to eat, but Chinese food I do like very, very much. I don't think you can ever get Chinese bored with Chinese food because there is a great deal of variation. Sichuan, Hunan, and Guangxi especially have great taste in their food. Um, Diversity in China generally is something that I like. Um, there's so many Chinese cities. I know a lot of Chinese people don't like the fact that it's overcrowded, but for me, I'm fascinated by architecture. I'm fascinated by cityscapes and urban scenes. And with China, you just get such a wide variation of cities. I mean, you get the beautiful canals of Suzhou. You get the booming skyscrapers of Hong Kong and Shanghai. You get ghost towns, which are, leaving aside all the political issues, it's very intriguing. Ordos City, for example, in Nemongo. Um, So from an architectural point of view, there's some very interesting projects going on in China. Um, China is well ahead of the rest of the world in terms of cities with over 1 million people. The study that I conducted not so long ago, there is at least 144 Chinese cities with an urban population of more than 1 million, and that's not including all the cities which have a total population of well over 1 million. So um, there's, it's such a big country that there's always something new to see, and I find that fascinating. History. Um, this is not to say, China's had a very troubled history at times, but the fact that it's such a long recorded history for me is utterly fascinating. Um, I just love the idea that you could be sitting in a hotel room. This is what I done when I was sitting in a sort of hotel room in Guilin. I was thinking, on this very spot, what would this have been 100 years ago, 200 years ago, 500 years ago, 2000 years ago? I find that idea fascinating, to think what people would have been in this spot at that time. Um, if you're a history buff, China is a fascinating country. Um, numerous dynasties, numerous petty kingdoms, and each dynasty has its own style and its own fashions, and I just find that fascinating. Such a long history. Music. Now, with this, I should emphasize that I'm talking about traditional music, not necessarily pop music, because I find Chinese modern pop music sounds much like pop music anywhere. But traditional Chinese music is so beautiful. It's so relaxing. Um, I really do feel that way. Some instruments like the erhu, for instance, give such a they really do calm the mind. And again, there's great variation in that from province to province, from ethnic group to ethnic group. You get, for example, traditional Mongol style ballads. You get traditional Miao singing. You get a very wide range there. Some pieces that stand out for me is like Qinghai Lake, um, Your Color. This is the English translation. I don't know what the exact Chinese translation would be, but like a lot of languages, when Chinese is sung, it's really beautiful. Um, so definitely music is very, very high up there. Then you get music that is incredibly inspiring, as befits a great nation, which China unquestionably is. Um, Hospitality. This is something I think sometimes is understated, because we sometimes have a perception that China is quite a conservative, closed country. Actually, if you meet the right people, it is one of the most hospitable places in the world. And I am quite well traveled. That's not to say that everyone is friendly, of course not. But in my experience, you will not find better guides than young Chinese people. I'll give an example of that. I went for a day trip to Changsha. It's a large provincial level city. Actually, it's a sub-provincial city, biggest city of Hunan province. Now, although I've got friends all over the country, I didn't at that time know anybody in Changsha, so it's slightly apprehensive. It's a big city, and I was kind of thinking, well, if I have problems, I'm going to have some problems here. But I met a group of young students, and those guys took it on themselves. They didn't have to. There was no obligation to basically be my guide, help me out, show me around. I was so grateful for that, because it really brightened up my day. I'm a very social person, so I love meeting new people anyway. But I know if I'd been on my own that day, I would have been somewhat depressed. And just having locals who know the place. Actually, those young men weren't all local. Some of them were just studying there. But the point is, they took it on themselves to bring around a complete stranger. And the thing about it is, I completely trusted them. They had no malicious intent. They wouldn't try and take my money or anything like that. As a teacher, some of the people that were most helpful to me were my own students. As a teacher in China, you'll find in every class, you'll have some students who will go out of their way to try and be helpful to you. It helps them because it helps them to practice their English, but to me, that is something that is very striking. Um, so if you're in trouble in China, young Chinese people, for the most part, again, you can't generalize, but for the most part, they are very helpful, um, very hospitable, and in many cases, they simply want to practice their English, especially in provincial cities or let's say not major cities. They just value the experience of meeting a foreigner. They find it interesting. Um, that's another aspect I actually quite like. In the real China, so to speak, that is outside the major cities. If you're a Westerner, you do get a real sense that it's something special, that it's not spoiled by tourism, that you are in a completely different culture and you do stand out. Now, like I said in my video about teaching, if you are an introverted person, you can't really go to China. But if you are someone who has quite a lot of confidence and you don't mind people staring at you, it can actually be quite a interesting experience. Some people would take it the wrong way; they take it as something hostile. But the truth is, most, especially young people, they find it a novelty. And personally, I really enjoyed the idea of people coming up to me wanting photographs. I wasn't remotely offended by it. In fact, I was rather my ego actually got the better of me. I felt like a minor celebrity. It was great. Um, Photography, there's another area. Uh, China's not only an incredibly photogenic country, but it's a very photo tolerant country. You'll find that you can take photographs of almost anything. And actually, I would argue it's more tolerant than the West in this sense. What I mean by that is, like I say, I'm interested in architecture. Now, I could openly take pictures of a railway station in China, trains, and so on, and I can more or less do that freely. In the West, I've done it once in Birmingham actually. I was told to delete the photos. That's the way it is. Um, in China, people seem to be pretty relaxed about that. Now, in Beijing, it would be a bit stricter. You can't, for example, take pictures of guards outside Tiananmen Square, but every country in the world has rules like that. So it's a pretty photo tolerant country. Overall. I'm not saying there's no rules. I'm not saying you can intrude, like you can go up to someone and take a picture of them without their permission. But I find the Chinese are pretty, a lot of them like to be in photographs actually. I remember once I was on a train and there was an elderly lady and her granddaughter, and I sort of asked, did she mind if I took her picture? She was very open to that. I always asked, incidentally. Um, what else can I say? Affordable. Well, as a Westerner, you'll find almost everything is very affordable. Not universally. There's certain things you would pay more for, but general living costs. I'm talking about eating. I'm talking about if you're a smoker, smoking's very cheap. Um, all those sorts of things. You'll find that's something that's very pleasant. Because, for example, if you're holidaying around Europe or North America, you'll find that money is a big considering factor. In China, I'm not saying you don't have to consider it, but it's less of a factor because so many things are affordable, with the exception of places like Shanghai and Beijing. But you would expect that in bigger cities. But in smaller cities, it's incredibly affordable. That's wonderful. Um, there's also, and I guess this relates to the hospitality factor, there is a down to earth aspect of the Chinese people, not just young people, people in general that I really like. Um, I mean, I know in recent years there's been discussion of Chinese capitalism and materialism and all the rest of it, and that is true, but there is also a homeliness, or maybe that's not the right word, but a down to earth attitude among the Chinese. I'll give an example. You could be sitting around a dinner table, and the local cop could be having a beer with you, and he could offer you a cigarette. I mean, you get that sort of environment in China, which I really like actually. Um, you don't necessarily get it in some other Asian countries, which would be a lot more formal. I'm not going to name anywhere, but I think it is true to say that there is a down to earth culture in China, which is very welcoming, especially in the south. Um, Local Chinese, even if there's a language barrier, you'll find they're very easygoing most of the time. I'm not saying there's never cultural difficulties. I'm not saying there's never communication difficulties or there's never misunderstandings. There is. But you'll find that a lot of people tend to be pretty easygoing about things. Yes, you'll see people lose their temper. Yes, there's people who don't have patience. And yes, you get all the side effects from being in a very heavily populated country. But there is definitely that easygoing environment as well. By easygoing, I don't mean that it's like a lazy environment. People are very hardworking. But what I mean is, it's a bit hard to explain. I'll try and give an example. My school bicycle had its tire flat, so I had to bring that to the local mechanics. Now, I was expecting to give the guy some money because they'd spent an hour working on this. So I was thinking, okay, I'll give the guy some money for his work. No, nothing. They just done that for free. And I think it was just the idea of helping a foreigner. So definitely get that environment in China, and I really like it. Sometimes you will get people come up to you and they'll speak in Chinese, and even if you say you don't understand the language, they'll persist. That can be a little bit unnerving at times, but overall, I find that that easygoing atmosphere, that aspect is very welcoming. I like it. Um, what else can I say? There's certain things that China doesn't have that the West does that I think should stay in the West. That is very refreshing. Um, I mean, there is a development of this in China now, which I think would be unfortunate. But I do think, for example, preserving certain customs is a very important thing. For the most part, China still does that, although there is aspects of Western culture. I don't think, incidentally, that Western culture is a bad thing. I'm a Westerner, I don't agree with those Westerners who say, oh, you know, they're very hostile to that. I think that some aspects of Western culture could be a good influence, but I think there's other aspects that are a bad influence. Now, what I like about China is there's still a lot of the country that is still China, um, and it hasn't been spoiled by tourism. That's a good thing. That is definitely a good thing. Um, what else can I say? The diversity in landscape. There's mountains, there's deserts, there's plains. It's one of the most diverse countries in the world when it comes. Yeah, Shanghai. I love Shanghai's culture. It's a great city, vibrant, big, colorful, brash. Um, I haven't been to Beijing, so I can't really comment in detail about Beijing. But all of those aspects I really like. Respect for um, for elders, I think, is something that can be seen in other Asian countries, but it is quite noticeable in China. Um, what else? I think there's less of a gulf in some ways between men and women, and this might be a controversial point for my Western viewers, but it's only consistent with what I've said before. You don't really see the same level of aggressive feminism in China. There, I said it. Certainly, you have women's rights movements, but you don't see the same level of petty, vindictive, militant feminism that you do in the West. I like that. Like I said, it might be a controversial point among some of my Western viewers, but there you go. Um, what else can I say? Yeah, I think I'll leave it there. I'm sure there's many other aspects. There's plenty of ceremony. Oh, here's one: the diversity of culture. Um, it's true that you don't have multiculturalism in the sense of the West, in the sense of lots of nationalities mixing, but you do have internal multiculturalism in the sense that there are 56 different ethnic groups, 55 minorities. It's a lot more, in that sense, a lot more diverse in Japan or Korea, and that's something that's fascinating because each of the minorities has their own culture, their own customs. One thing that I would honestly say about China, you can never be bored. If you're an open-minded person, you cannot be bored in China. Um, I love Chinese traditional costumes. I love I love the music, etc., etc. Yeah, I'll leave it there. Um, any comments, feel free to ask. Anything you want to ask me, um, go right ahead. I'll try my best to answer.